Sometimes love isn't enough. As an adoptive mom, people would often say this to me, as if to imply I couldn't love my son enough to change behaviors or heal his trauma, so I should probably just give up. At least that's how I took those four powerful words, which had buried themselves deeply in my mind, leading me to doubt my ability to parent my child. Sometimes love isn't enough. That is the truth. Oftentimes, you need love and powerful, personalized tools to raise a child who's experienced trauma and disrupted attachment, or a child who you're struggling to connect with. I am on a mission to help parents raising kids with a tricky past to show up with unconditional love and practical tools to lovingly manage even the most challenging of times. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Plus, if you like what you hear, I'd love for you to leave a review. Now let's get to the good stuff. Welcome back to Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. I am your host, Angie Grandt. I am a parent coach who has such a passion for helping parents raising children who have a tricky past, kids who have experienced trauma, disrupted attachment. And I'm here to provide you practical tools and support and understanding for what you're going through because I've been there. I know how incredibly hard it is to raise kids who are pushing us away at it seems like every chance they can get. So let's dive into today's topic. Today, I'm going to talk about diagnoses. So I am not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm going to start by saying that. I am a speech and language pathologist, but that's not what we're talking about today. I want to talk about what seems to be and what I experienced as the alphabet soup of diagnoses. I know when my son was younger, that the first thing that was really apparent to me was at age 5 was difficulties with following simple instructions. So my son is extremely bright and very he speaks very well. He's very attentive to others. He has great insight and intuition. But I'll never forget when he was young, I started to notice that I would give him simple instructions, simple one-step instructions, and he couldn't follow through. I'd ask him to go to the kitchen and get a bowl, and it was so extremely hard to get to complete that one simple task. So I was using all the tools that I had in my tool belt about, breaking down instructions, usually using visual supports, scaffolding and prompting in ways to help increase success. But the problem continued nonetheless. I'd give simple instructions or somebody else would give simple instructions, and there were difficulties with following through. And it wasn't for lack of trying. It wasn't a defiant behavior. It appeared to be a perhaps difficulty with processing, difficulty with understanding. And so, working in the medical field, the psychology field, I thought, well, we better figure this out and get a diagnosis so that I can better understand what is happening with my child. Mind you, I knew at that point that just given the adoption, that there was a strong likelihood of a history of trauma and disrupted attachment. I knew that, but the behavior that I saw in front of me was a behavior of difficulty following instructions and inattention, or so it seemed. So I, like many moms I know, quickly jumped into action to make an appointment with a neurologist to figure this out. I needed to, for my own sense of understanding, I needed to have a label to explain this lack of follow through with simple instructions. And that's exactly what I got. I scheduled the appointment with the neurologist. Tons and tons and tons of tests were completed, and I got what I was looking for. I got a whole list of diagnoses from, ADHD and anxiety and processing difficulties and all kinds of things, right? exactly what I had expected and what I was looking for. Fast forward a few months and things continued. New problems popped up. Some defiant behaviors, some argumentative behaviors, perhaps even some sneaking, stealing behaviors. So again, I seek another professional and I get more diagnoses. This pattern of behavior on my part continued. I'd see new problems, I'd seek another specialist, and I would get more answers, more diagnoses, more acronyms, right? I see this happen time and time again. I'm in several groups with other parents raising children from a tricky past. And as parents, that relentless pursuit to try and get answers, to figure out what is wrong with our child, to try and understand what exactly is leading to this behavior that doesn't match my expectations about how a child should behave or should act, or to help us understand the mismatch that's happening in our head, right? I could have conversations with my son where I had tons of evidence that he was very bright, yet simple things would come up that seemed so challenging. I needed answers, or I thought I needed answers. This relentless pursuit continued from 5 years old on up through, I don't know, 13, 14, 15 years old. It was as if, well, I don't have a diagnosis to explain this new behavior. Let's pursue more testing. Let's get more answers. Now, mind you, while I was going through this process, while I was on this relentless pursuit to get another diagnosis, get another answer, I was missing the big picture. I knew, and parents raising children from a tricky past know that our kids have experienced some level of trauma. That trauma may have been the disruption in their placement. It may have been difficulties with attaching early on. Um, it may have been specific incidents or series of incidents that were scary for our kids. And we know science tells us that the trauma itself, the experience of trauma, and like we had talked in a recent episode about, that event, the way our child experienced it, and the effect that it had on them, science tells us that that sequence of, event, experience, and effect in and of itself can impact all of these things. It can impact our child's ability to focus and pay attention because when our child is in a heightened state of arousal, the higher parts of their brain that do thinking and problem solving and figuring things out isn't even getting the right kind of blood flow that it needs in that moment when our child is in this fight or flight mode. We know that. Or we know that when our child has experienced early trauma, that problem solving and deciding to do what they have learned is right, they don't have the capability to do that in the moment. Because again, that part of the brain isn't even getting the right activation that it needs in the moment for children to effectively problem solve. Yet, as parents, we keep looking for different answers when the answer's been right in front of us this whole time. When our kids have experienced trauma, complex trauma, um, disruptions in their attachment, disruptions in placement, when our kids have experienced early trauma, complex trauma, trauma related to their most important relationships, we know that it impacts all of their behaviors, their emotions, their ability to self regulate. I know many kids end up getting a diagnosis of PTSD. And when I think about that diagnosis, that, that post traumatic stress disorder, meaning somebody who has experienced something traumatic, an event that they experienced in such a way that it's had this profound effect on their ability to effectively handle stress. And by handling stress, I don't mean like handling a stressful time in a checkout line at a store. I mean, their biological systems in their body are having a stress response as if they're still in danger, as if they're still experiencing the trauma. And not to get too technical here, but when we experience trauma, it it triggers that adrenaline response. It triggers that fight or flight in our brain. That that sequence of events is happening in the parts of our brain that don't do problem solving, that don't do thinking, that are not involved in language. And when our children or anyone experiences trauma, not only is it happening in that part of the brain that doesn't have language, it can't problem solve, but it also can't tell time. And so, what we know, what science tells us and has been telling us for the past several decades, is that when a child or a person has experienced a significant trauma in the past, and fast forward to today, whatever today is, however far past that traumatic event is, if something is triggering that trauma, if there's a stimulus that is putting that child in that same place again, their brain doesn't know that they're no longer in danger. Their brain doesn't know that the event that's they're reliving was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. They don't know that because that trauma is stored in a part of the brain that doesn't understand time. It doesn't have words. It can't problem solve. It cannot make good decisions. It's just reacting. Hey, I would often tell families, you think about if you had experienced a scary, I don't know, say, for example, you had experienced a scary situation with a bear, right? You were in the woods out for a hike and there was a bear there and you were terrified. Well, the front part of your brain isn't going to be thinking about the best thing that you could say to the bear or who you might call. No, it is the lower part of your brain that is going to react in the moment by making biological changes in your body, changing the way that your blood works, your hormones, all of it. There's a biological response that's happening in your body in the moment, and you're not thinking about it. It just happens because your body is in fight or flight mode. So you do what you need to do in the moment, but that memory of the bear is stored in that same place in the brain. It's not stored up in the part of your brain that does your talking and your problem solving and your higher level thinking. That's not where that memory is stored. That memory is stored in the part of your brain where that fight or flight mode lives. So fast forward 6 months or 10 years, if there's something that happens that reminds you of that event, whether it's a snapping of a twig as you're going on a hike that reminds you of that event, your brain, the lower part of your brain, immediately creates that same response in your body, and you don't get to decide to do it or not do it. It happens. It just happens. You're right back in fight or flight mode. Your adrenaline has kicked in, and you're right back. It's as if you're in that exact moment when the bear was there. You don't get to decide this. And so when we think about our kids and how when we're experiencing life with them, we're experiencing simple things like, for example, my example of giving simple instructions. I don't know if there were things in that moment or in our life in general that were keeping my son in that heightened state of alertness, keeping his brain in this place where he was ready to fight or flee or freeze, whatever he perceived that he needed to do. I don't know that. I know I'll often hear from parents that, when I explain this to them, they'll say, "Well, my child doesn't look scared. My child does not look like they're in a heightened state of alertness. In fact, they look pretty mellow and chill and are saying things that make me think that they're pretty calm. But here's the scoop, right? We know that our brain has multiple levels of response when we encounter something dangerous. One of them is fight, right? We know what fight looks like. It looks like a child on attack, a child who's spewing words at us, throwing things at us. Their body is showing us that they are in that fight mode. That one's pretty obvious. If you live in a home with a child who has gone in and out of that fight mode in a reactive way to something that has um, caused them to remember something in the past, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You can't miss it. However, when our child is in that flee reaction mode or the freeze reaction mode, it can oftentimes have the complete opposite response in our child's body. Think about that for a second. If you're encountering a bear, you're not immediately going to attack, right? That probably isn't the safest response for your body to decide. In fact, you're much more likely to quickly assess the environment, maybe freeze, hoping that the bear won't attack. And if the bear continues to pursue you, then perhaps fleeing. But fighting is likely the least likely response. So when I talk with my clients about that your child might be in that fight or flight mode, what I'm really saying is that they might be in such a state that you wouldn't be able to see it, right? The fight one, you can see it, but the rest of them can look really hard, or it can be really hard to see what kind of state that our child is in, but they're in it nonetheless. So as you think about the interactions that you've had with your child over the past day, the past week, the past month, and your mind is going to the what's wrong with my child? What is this diagnosis that's creating all of these problem behaviors? I really want to encourage you. If you know that you are raising a child who has experienced a tricky past, who's experienced disruptive placement, who's experienced trauma, I really want to encourage you to take a step back. And I in no way am diagnosing your child. That is not the purpose of this episode. But rather, I really want to encourage you to take a step back and really ask yourself, is it possible that the behaviors that I'm experiencing with my child right now are really a reflection of their tricky past and not so much about, oppositional defiance or ADHD or some other label that we're trying to give it, which really puts more blame on the child? Because when we can look at our kids through a lens, a trauma-informed lens, looking at our child and seeing that they're not deciding to ruin our day, they're not deciding to be oppositional, but instead they're responding to something from their past that has resurfaced for whatever reason that is causing their brain to put them in the fight, flight, or freeze mode. And to you, it might look like they're being defiant. So I would love, love, love to hear your thoughts about this one. And again, like I said, I'm not diagnosing your child. That is not my place. But I am encouraging you to look at your kids differently through a different lens, through a lens that says, I know that something challenging happened to my child. And how is that possibly leading to the behavior that I, as a parent, am really struggling with today? Because when we can look at the behaviors through that lens, it will give us so much more compassion for what they're experiencing and will help us to respond to our kids in a different way instead of reacting to the behaviors that are in front of us that are driving us crazy, quite frankly. So, when you are ready to start shifting the way that you respond to your kids and really get some powerful tools to show up differently for your kids so that you can change the trajectory of your relationship, contact me. My contact info is in the show notes. I am here for you to really change this generational cycle of trauma. So that's it. I hope that you found this episode so incredibly powerful. I know that I did. So take care and we will talk soon. I hope that you found this episode so incredibly powerful. Thank you for joining us for Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. If you resonated with what you heard here, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a review. You can also follow us on all the socials. Check the show notes for all the details about how to start tackling behaviors and creating a powerful, loving relationship with your child, a child who needs your love the most. And if your gut's telling you that it's time for a change now, book a free consult. I'd love to help you love unconditionally and show you that you have that power within you.